My name is John Freeman. I am the chairman of the program committee of the San Francisco Historical Society. We are in a unique situation because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and we are, instead of having our regular monthly meetings, which we do 10 months of the year, we are doing a remote meeting. We all know the need for social distancing, so obviously we're not all going to meet in the same place, but we have this opportunity not only to present this program, but to do as many programs as we need to until we can be back again meeting in one place. The speaker today is John Martini, and John Martini is well known to many of us. He is for 25 years, he was a national park ranger, gave talks throughout the system, spent some time at Pearl Harbor. He spent time on the East Coast, but most of his time was all spent in the Bay Area. From that, he has done very, very thorough research on a lot of park service things related to the GGNRA. And so John is the expert on Alcatraz, Fort Point, the Marin Headlands, Fort Baker. The whole list goes on and on and on. And then, of course, he has done so many things in regard to the other things that all relate to kind of the ocean and the military on the West Coast. So I'm thrilled that John is our speaker today, and John is going to provide us with some very interesting information. This particular virus that we're dealing with is interesting that we're talking about it from San Francisco, because in San Francisco, of course, we've never had a virus quite like this, although we did have the 1918-1919 flu epidemic, which was very serious. But we have a city that was burned down about 5-6 times in its early years. And of course, in 1906, everything was burned down, or at least a good 2/3 of the city was burned down. And we bounced back. And I think the same message is here as well. We're going to adapt and we're going to bounce back. And so the Historical Society is live and well. It's just that we're going to have to have a different face than we've had for many years by doing things like this, which is a remote broadcast. John Martini has written numerous books about the various portions of the Bay as relates to the military armament and so forth. He has also done a great book on Sutro Baths. So we have a very experienced speaker, a great tour leader, and one of our great friends, John Martini.
My name is John Martini. To introduce myself, I'm from the city. Grew up in the Richmond district and out in Westlake, and learned to love my city and its history. And as soon as I learned how to master Muni, I was all over San Francisco as a preteen and a teen, and places that I loved to go later turned into part of my life's career, because many of the places, like Sutro Baths, Ocean Beach, the Presidio, ended up as part of the Golden Gate National Recreation Area. I became a park ranger, actually on Alcatraz in 1974. And for 25 years, I worked for the National Park Service. A lot of my childhood memories and experiences came in invaluably when I was telling the stories of parts of my city that are now part of the park. And because I had an institutional knowledge of the place, I became a military historian and later de facto historian for the Sutro area. And since my retirement many years ago, I've written several books about GGNRA and its history. And I'm happy to today to be talking about Sutro's Glass Palace, a book that I wrote about the history of Sutro Baths. And without this, I think maybe we should jump into the show. One of the places that I visited repeatedly when I was a small kid was Sutro Baths. Although we called it Sutros in those days, there was no longer any swimming in the 1950s when I was growing up. but it was still an amazing building. I remember my mom taking me around, and I was just fascinated by what was in it and the building itself. Everything from mummies and stuffed birds to whitewashed windows leading into mysterious interior areas and locked doorways, ice skaters and telescopes, and it just reeked of history and age and mystery. And I wanted to know more about it. Even as a little kid, I was shaking doorknobs, asking mom, so what was this place? Years later, after Sutro Baths burned down and it was only a memory, people started to show renewed interest in the ruins of the baths. It became one of the most popular areas in the Golden Gate National Recreation Area. When I retired, the park asked me, would I write a history of the Sutro Baths, both to guide the future preservation of the site and interpretation? What went on here? What was the story? And also very pragmatically, what are these weird pieces of concrete sticking out of the ground? Well, Sutro's Glass Palace, the book that I wrote, the show we're going to do now. Let me try to tell you where Sutro's first came from. What was the idea? How did it develop? What was its history and what was its demise? The setting, the rugged northwest corner of San Francisco is called Land's End. To the early Spanish, it was called Punta de los Lobos Marinos, point of sea wolves, for the sea lions on the rocks. And it was an incredibly melancholy, lovely, evocative area, even for the Native American people who lived there long before Europeans ever showed up. Go there today, it's sometimes been called San Francisco's Wilderness Next Door. And maybe the centerpiece of the wilderness next door would be the Cliff House at the furthest west point on the San Francisco Peninsula, and next to it, the ruins of something mysterious, something grand, something, again, melancholy. Ruins are melancholy, and ruins attract people. And these ruins are like nothing else in San Francisco. What were they? What story did they tell? What story do they leave with us today? And what they were is they were the site of the most magnificent example of 19th century Comstock exuberance seen on the San Francisco coastline. The Sutro Baths, constructed by Comstock millionaire Adolph Sutro in the 1880s and 1890s. They stood here at the edge of the Pacific, used by generation after generation as a San Francisco, until their eventual demise and demolition and then destruction by fire in 1966. The area of Land's End still is very rugged. Not a lot of roads traverse it. The few roads and streetcar lines that did climb along its cliffs all invariably ended up slipping into the Straits of the Golden Gate over the years. So today it's mainly accessible by hiking. And early in the history of San Francisco under Europeans, it became something of a destination. People would leave crowded, noisy, dangerous downtown San Francisco, which was mostly focused around what's now the financial district, and they would head out to what they call the cliff for a day of hiking and running horses up and down the beach. And of course, when you're out hiking and riding horses, you get thirsty. Going to a tavern on the cliffs called Cliff House. The Cliff House opened in 1863, and it had what everybody today would say would be the big three: location, location, and location. Sitting at the tip of the westernmost part of the city, it had spectacular view over the Seal Rocks, which at that time, even this photo you can see, they were inhabited by sea lions. The area became very popular, and it was a destination that was used by called the sporting class, people with money, people who were looking to do some recreation, usually having to do with drinking, partying, and maybe having an afternoon delight with your mistress. The Cliff House developed sort of a rowdy reputation. It was remote, and it was where you went to sport. Just north of the Cliff House was a beautiful little pocket beach. It was sometimes called Seal Rock Beach. It was sometimes called Nyad Cove. It had a fantastic view looking towards Marin County and looking towards the Marin Headlands. In this 1870s painting, you can see Mount Tamalpais in the distance. This is going to be the site of Sutro Baths. This early rendition of it shows it was just one of those little sweet pocket beaches like you still see today scattered down the San Mateo coast if you're driving down to Santa Cruz. Unfortunately, this one's going to see a bunch of changes. In 1880, investor Adolph Sutro shows up on this scene. Adolph Sutro was an old hand in San Francisco. He'd come during the gold rush, and a self-trained engineer. He had made a substantial fortune in Nevada developing what was called the Sutro Tunnel. The Sutro Tunnel was a miles-long tunnel that went under Mount Davidson in Nevada and the deep mines of the Comstock lode. And it wasn't a silver mine. What it did was the Sutro Tunnel drained water out of the deep mines, and it also hauled ore out horizontally rather than vertically at a fraction of the cost. And Sutro made quite a profit off building his Sutro Tunnel. He left Nevada with a fortune and probably maybe somewhere near $1 million, about 22 million in 2020 dollars. Came back to San Francisco, where he had started his career as a young boy in 1850. Well, 30 years later, he's very successful. He's very rich. He was not as rich as the fellows who built like the Nob Hill mansions, but he had nothing to squawk about. He would invest in land, and he would eventually own 1/12 of San Francisco. He liked to invest in dune type areas and forest them, and then flip them into profitable real estate. And he also was a man who loved San Francisco, and he loved the area around the Cliff House. He purchased a piece of land overlooking the Cliff House in 1880, and he turned it into his residence called the Sutro Heights. He built his house up there. He built an observatory. He turned what were just rocky potato fields into a mini Versailles, as interpreted through West Coast Nouveau Riche architecture. Replicas of statues from antiquity, planter beds, topiary, hedges. And you can see just outside the gates, though, the blowing dunes of the the blowing dunes of the outer Richmond district. Under Sutro, the Cliff House, which he purchased pretty quickly, was reborn as more of a family attraction. The private dining rooms were done away with, and the sporting class was discouraged from sporting. And Sutro wanted to make sure that people could come out to his new destination, the Sutro Heights, the Cliff House, the lands around it that he owned. This was a destination. And he wanted to make sure the working class could come out, not just people that could afford their own carriages or afford to pay a stagecoach trip. He would underwrite a steam train line that came from corner of, California and Presidio Avenue, came out California Street, ran around the cliffs of Land's End, and it stopped right opposite the main gate to Sutro Heights. It was called the Ferries and Cliff House Railroad. Sutro didn't own it. He got the charter to build it and quickly flipped the charter to another street railroad company. What he did was he insisted, though, that as part of the deal, transfers would be offered. So you could actually ride the streetcar and check onto the Ferries and Cliff House steam train for 1 nickel. Transfers were almost unheard of because there was no muni. Sutro made it happen. So all of a sudden the working class are able to come out to the cliff. And one area of the cliff that especially intrigued Sutro was, as part of the property he purchased, little Seal Rock Beach, Nyad Cove. And the family story says that he used to go for hikes around the tip of the point, which is technically Point Lobos. And he was fascinated watching tide pools as the ocean would fill them and then the water would drain out. And when the water left, they'd see sea stars and sea anemones and tiny fish trapped in the tide pools waiting for the tide to come in again. And Sutro, being an engineer and being very 19th century, thought, I can do better. And he set out to convert Nyad Cove into a giant outdoor aquarium. And his process was something that you really had to be an engineer to think of. He looked at the cove, and if we look at this aerial map looking down on it, here's what he intended to do. I'm going to turn on a pen feature here. Here at the top is a circular aquarium that Sutro constructed out of natural rock. And it was to be filled with the tides coming in and coming out. To protect his aquarium, he built a seawall the entire length of Naiad Cove. Work began in the late 1880s. His aquarium, it was meant to literally be an aquarium, something like would maybe you'd think of it like marine land of the Pacific in future generations. The hydraulic system that filled the pools, it began with a cleft that was blasted out of the rocks just on the far side of Point Lobos. And this catch basin, sort of like a rock frying pan, waves would break into it at high tide, and the water would, just by gravity, flow through a couple of 100-foot long tunnel that Sutro had his workers carve through the tip of Point Lobos. And then the water rushing through the tunnel would fill, in this picture in the lower left, the circular aquarium. When the tide filled the aquarium, they would drop a sluice gate so the water would stop flowing in, and then the water would be released through essentially a drain at the bottom. And as the water drained out, people could walk through steps down into the aquarium and look at sea stars and fish. And Sutro claimed there's going to be sea lions that were going to be thrown into the mix. He was an engineer, he wasn't a marine biologist, so no sea lions, but he built it, and the thing worked, at least hydraulically. He demonstrated it to the public several times in 1889. And let's take a look at the cove from another vantage point. This is looking down from approximately what's today's Louis restaurant. You can see the rock seawall that Sutro constructed clear across the beach, and at the extreme right, there's a circular aquarium. The first day it's demonstrated to the public, invites the media. Every newspaper covers it. Sutro's aquarium at Point Lobos. He's telling the press, he's going, this is just the start. I'm going to turn this entire cove into an outdoor swimming station so people can come and they can swim in salt water safely. Saltwater bathing was very popular health fetish in those days, and Sutro intended to capitalize on it by offering saltwater bathing, not in the open ocean, but as you can see here, in a pond of salt water that formed behind his breakwater. Okay. In this view here, I'm going to turn on the pen again. At the extreme left, highlighting in red, this is the catch basin, a tunnel that ran through Point Lobos. The water flowed into the aquarium. And then when not needed anymore for the fish and the sea lions, which apparently never appeared, it was nothing more than a hydraulic wonder, the water would be released this way into just an informal protected seawater pond. And there was a drain at this end, so the water went out when it was no longer needed or become dirty or whatever. There's unlimited supply, and it worked great. But Sutro loved to tinker. He was always tinkering with this thing. And this is approximately how the baths looked about 1889. They hadn't called it the baths yet. It was still the aquarium and the bathing station. But said Sutro was saying, I'm not done, and he wasn't. 2 years later, this is what he had done. He lined most of the cove with concrete. So he literally subdivided the cove into what he called swimming tanks. We'd call them pools, just different terminology. And here's the old circular aquarium. It's like I said, it never really worked for fish or sea lions, but it turned into what we call simply a settling basin. So water coming from the catch basin into the settling pond, it was heated in this boiler house, and different temperatures of water were maintained in each of the 7 pools that you see here. Or actually, this one's 6. I'll come back to the 7th pool in a second. In this illustration, the arrow at lower left will show the way that the water actually flowed into the baths. Coming out of the tunnel, it went into a receiving basin, sort of filtered the water. A settling pond further settled it, and then the water by gravity flew through the supply canal to each of the 6 different pools. They were heated to different temperatures with the simple expedient of mixing extremely hot water coming out of the powerhouse with water that was ocean temperature. And from what I've read, the warmest pool, generally number 6 on this map, was about 85, 86 degrees, maybe up to 90. And then they were sequentially cooler until pool number 1, the biggest pool, that was ocean temperature. They didn't even bother to heat it. That was like bone chilling 52, 53 degrees. A photograph taken just about the same time as that previous diagram shows the work in progress. Again, the views from about where Louis' restaurant is. You can see the circular tank in dead center. That was the old aquarium turned into a settling pond. And you can see these smaller rectangular pools just below it. They're actually full of water. Although the building is under construction, the hydraulics are working. Sutro was never really satisfied with the structure while it was going up. His initial idea to have it be a totally open air bathing station and just with natural rock walls, as you saw, it evolved into this concrete lined swimming tanks, heated. And he knew the weather out there was cold. And he decided that what he'd do is he'd build a glass roof over it, something along the lines of like a covered glass train station. And he thought at first that the sunlight filtering through the glass roof would heat the water sufficiently. Now that didn't work. Thermodynamics didn't work that way. It was still cold. So what he eventually decided to do was to erect not just a roof, but to sidewall the entire structure. So instead of an open air swimming establishment, you ended up with the world's largest indoor swimming complex. They used to use the marvelous term, a natatorium. It took an army of workers, and it took them years to finish. From the 1888 demonstration of the initial aquarium, it would be March of 1896, 7 years before the building was finished and open to the public. People that saw it under construction were just astounded at the vast amounts of materials that went into the building. 3 acres of glass, 3 million board feet of lumber, 270,000 cubic yards of concrete. That's mind-numbing. Almost that whole cove was concreted over. From above, this is probably, we figure, 1893. The powerhouse in the foreground with the smokestack. There were boilers inside, and the boilers did 2 things. The boilers heated water for laundry. Laundry occupied much of that building in the foreground for the swimming suits, and it also produced hot water as a byproduct of the steam boilers for heating the water inside the baths themselves. Adolf visiting the baths while under construction. I like to say that Adolph Sutro was probably Mensa level intelligent, just an astounding mind. He had his finger in everything, but he was also probably ADD because he kept being sidetracked into different projects, and he'd delegate construction of like the baths to one foreman while he was traveling in Europe, and he was having extensive letters where he talked about buying books and buying Egyptian mummies. But he loved San Francisco, and he wanted to do something for the people, and this was going to be his big show. One problem, though, is as he kept changing his mind, costs kept going up and up and up. 1895, the baths are just about ready to open. We can tell it's brand new because The whitewash still looks fresh on the side. Up on top of the hill above the baths, the little turreted building and the little tower, that was Adolf Sutro's house. Inside the baths, people were literally astounded when they walked inside. This may have been the biggest building west of the Rockies. The black and white photos don't do color justice because those were colored panes of glass in the domes overhead, so that sunlight gave multicolored rippling effects on the water, especially when people were inside, and thousands and thousands of people at a time making waves in the water. The sound of churning, the kids' screams, music playing. It was an overwhelming sensation. There's sort of a mythology about Sutro Baths, and one thing is that this was some amazing technological construction out here. It really wasn't. It was impressive. It was impressive because this was the Wild West. There was no transcontinental highways yet. The ships still had to go around Cape Horn to get here. I like to say this, the smoke was still clearing at the OK Corral when Adolph Sutro started his visions for the Sutro Baths. And this was one way of San Francisco showing that, you know, by gosh, we're civilized out here. But they were using technology that already existed. Here's a picture of London Bridge Station in England. This was built in the 1860s. And you can see the same type of idea with the arched span covering the, in this case, the train tracks. In the case of Sutro Baths, covering the swimming pools. I'll go back for 1 second. You notice one difference is if you look at those curved trusses overhead, they're wood with some iron reinforcing, because again, out in the West here, we didn't have the Industrial Revolution helping us quite as much as they did in England. All the truss work here, it's iron and steel. If you were to take the roof off the baths and look down at it from above, it was on many levels because it was nestled into this little cove in the headlands of San Francisco. The pedestrian entrance at upper right, that was the where people entered from what's now Point Lobos Avenue. Street level at Point Lobos Avenue is fully 100 feet above the level of the water in the swimming tanks down below, which are just about at sea level. So again, turning on the red pen tool, people entered and they descended flight after flight of stairs. The first level that you hit was called a promenade level. And the promenade level is where a lot of the museum displays were, a lot of the Melodians and Nickelodeons. You walked under a giant vestibule and then down a grand staircase that led you all the way down to the water. On either sides of the grand staircase, underneath the bleacher seats, locker rooms, 517 individual changing rooms. Swimming is really what the baths were, designed for. People coming for recreation, saltwater bathing. In this case, these guys are members of a club. One of them has a shirt on that's the U.S. Volunteer Life Saving Service, sort of like a volunteer lifeguard organization. But not everybody was going to swim that came. Just going to Sutro's by itself was an event. And when you came into Sutro's, you could either buy a 10-cent ticket for just general admission, but no pools, or pay an extra 15 cents, which got you a swimsuit and access to the swimming pools. There's plenty to do if you didn't want to take if you didn't want to go for a swim. Band concerts, when Sutro's first opened, I should maybe give a timetable here. Sutro's had a soft opening in the fall of 1894. It really wasn't totally complete yet, and Sutro was having a political tug of war with the Southern Pacific Railroad, and he was actually holding the grand opening hostage until the Southern Pacific Railroad would give better fares on the streetcars out to the baths. So what Sutro did was he opened the baths to everything except swimming for a year and a half. And from late 1894 to early 1966, they had late 1894 to early 1896. They had band concerts, they had swimming exhibitions and high diving by pros, not the general public. The museums were open. It was great for promenading, but everyone's going, when are we going to be able to swim? Well, that happened in March of 1896. This was taken the grand opening day in March 1896. It's Fritz Schiel's orchestra. For a while, when the baths opened, they had a live orchestra 6 days a week. It's been a huge expense. And they found out very early on that the music that was played, it better be overwhelmingly loud because the building was so massive inside. It was 550 feet long. The ceiling was almost 120 feet. What you wanted to do was you wanted to have crashing orchestral pieces and overtures. They would try to have some singing, the word I'm looking for, a vocalist, opera star, and their voice just, no matter how strong they just couldn't fill the building. So you found like things like Sousa marches and Puccini's overtures. On the right, that funny glass face thing, that's a giant, called an orchestrion. If the band wasn't playing, you turned on the orchestrion. It was a giant music box. And you can see it was fully 10 feet tall. Some serious money went into Sutro Baths. Typical example of the events that went on. These are a couple of the handbills. On the left, Mammoth opening the swimming season, 1897. And Charles Cavell, he was sort of a feature there, champion swimmer. He swam around Seal Rocks. He had a trick where he would be chained up and thrown into the deep end of one of the pools, where he would be down for so long, people are just sure he had drowned, and the crowd was going crazy, telling the lifeguards to go save him. And he'd come bursting to the surface, well after anybody else would have drowned. It turned out he had an upside down tub at the deep end. It painted the same green as the concrete, and it was invisible from the bleacher seats. He was down there in an air bubble, came to the surface, and they called the Monte Cristo Act, sometimes also called the Monte Cristo Drowning Act. The School Children's Day, London Pantomime Comedy Company, music, bell ringing, acrobat feats, dancing. We're really talking about, it's like vaudeville. In fact, very shortly, I found out after the baths were built, they really didn't need that many swimming pools, so they planked over one of the pools, and it became a stage. And that's where you had vaudeville acts, tug of war, trained animals, dancers. In this case here, this is May Day, 1897. The seats are just about full to the gills. There's newspapers reported there were 19,000 people in attendance that day. This is terrifying. This is a wood building with some steel members in it, but fire doors, fire suppression. The safety officer in me just cringes when I look at this photo. I'm sure everyone's having a wonderful time. I'd be looking for the way out. And what was it all about? Why did they have 19,000 people there? They were watching the maypole dance on the stage over the swimming pool. Somebody suggested maybe each kid had 19 parents and relatives, so that's how you got 19,000 people jammed in there on that day. Technically, the actual capacity was rated somewhere around 25,000 people. And in addition to swimming and maypole dances and diving acts, there was what they called a museum in Sutros. This was really the era of the Cabinet of Curiosities. When you went on your travels, and Sutro traveled, he traveled extensively through Europe, you buy oddities and you bring them back and you put them in a case and let people look at them. Now we think of a museum and you go in and you see the Impressionists exhibit at the Legion of Honor or something. No, this was just random stuff. In this case, you've got a polar bear in one case. It looks like an Eskimo snowshoe in the other. Further down the way, there were suits of armor. There were stuffed seals and sea lions, endless stuffed birds, reptiles, gem displays. In this case here's a case on one of the levels, and in it you have a jaguar and a leopard and a tiger climbing a tree. That happened a lot. And there's a couple of house cats. So all we can think is that the theme of this particular cabinet, if anything, was kitty cats. Behind it, tour the world in 10 minutes. Stereo viewers. You just move from stereo viewer to stereo viewer, and you saw everything from the pyramids of Giza to the Arch de Triomphe. This is 19th century Americana, just entertainment every place you looked. And Sutro had a way of stuffing every available open space with cabinets of things on display, or Nickelodeons, or concession stands. Probably the finest in his collection were authentic Egyptian mummies and their sarcophagi that he purchased while he was in Egypt. A lot of stuff Sutro bought, frankly, was not of the highest quality. These are still considered to be immensely important. And when Sutro's finally closed down, these were on display through the 1960s. They were removed, and the last owners of Sutro's made sure that they went to the San Francisco State University, and they're now key to their museum studies department. So where students get to come in, they learn how to study artifacts, how to catalog them. They've been CAT scanned. They're not normally open to the public, but on special events, you'll see that the Egyptian collection, the Sutro mummies, will be displayed. So keep a lookout for it. We got to talk about swimming, and we've got to talk about what people wore in those days. These swimming costumes, as they called them, you were required to wear one when you went there. You couldn't bring your own bathing suit. In the 1890s, not a lot of people had bathing suits. And if you had let people come in just whatever they wanted to wear, you know, God knows what they'd be wearing into the pools. So for sanitation and probably for modesty, they had thousands and thousands of these bathing suits made of wool. The women's had full skirts below their knees. Their women are wearing bandanas because they didn't have bathing caps yet in those days, but the same thing, keep their hair in place and out of the filter drains. The guys' swimsuits are only slightly more revealing. They've still got the skirts on them, and they got the Sutro Baths logo on the front. They said that when you put these things on, when they got wet, they weighed about 5 pounds more just because they absorb so much water. When you paid to get in, as I mentioned, it was 10 cents admission in general, 15 cents to go to the pools. And if you paid the extra 15 cents, you got one of the double tickets below. The left-hand side was good for a bathing suit. Your first stop was you stopped at a bathing counter, and they gave you the suit, and they gave you 2 towels. And then you took the other half with you, and you went down the stairs, and then you went to the dressing rooms. And the locker guard would walk you to the dressing room about the size of a walk-in closet, unlock it, let you in. When he came out, he locked the door behind you, and he gave you the tag. That's what they're wearing around their neck. Those aren't, you know, religious medals. That's the tag for their locker room. Sutro's really crested 1897, 1898. It was not just the Sutro Baths. Remember, people use the expression going to the cliff? Well, by 1897, 1898, Sutro had created an amazing destination out there. Here are the Sutro Baths. Immediately above it, you can see there's a Ferris wheel, and if you look closely, there's an embryonic roller coaster in there. Take the electric cars for Golden Gate Park in the city. Streetcar line ran right up to the baths entrance, but maybe the most grandiose that even overshadowed the baths was the Chateau Cliff House. It opened in March 1896, the same month that Sutro Baths finally had its grand dedication, was totally thrown open to the public. This building is, if you say Cliff House, this is what people think of if they're from San Francisco. It only lasted 11 years. It burned in 1907. Things out there, they have a habit of burning up, blowing up, and being torn down. One generation of buildings after another has occupied the site of the Cliff House, and historians argue how many have existed, but this was the most grandiose. Sutro, it appears, he modeled it after sort of the Mad King Ludwig of Bavaria castle that he visited on one of his European trips. Now, everything was plowing along nicely until you really started to look at the books. All this grandiosity that Sutro had constructed here, this cost money, several $100,000 for the Cliff House, $1 million, it was estimated by the time all the changes were done, building the Sutro Baths. Now, Sutro was a rich guy, but that comes at a pretty high ticket. There was a steam train that I mentioned. Sutro didn't own this train. What he did is he had sold the rights to it to a group that was eventually purchased by Southern Pacific. And he always had a battle with Southern Pacific. They were trying to raise the rates from the Sutro's original nickel. They wanted, Southern Pacific Railroad wanted to raise it to 10 cents. That's why Sutro was holding the baths ransom for so long. He wouldn't open the baths till Southern Pacific agreed to keep it back to a nickel. And Sutro actually built, there's the railroad depot at Wright Center. He built a little strip mall type of area at the end of tracks. This is today the intersection of 48th Avenue and Point Lobos. There were rooming houses, there were shops, there were 6 places to get a drink within 1 block. This little area, this was called Ocean Terrace. Sutro owned it. More investments. Shot at Ocean Terrace, and this has been dated to about 1903, when at its height, you can get an idea in the background, crowds of people milling back and forth, waiting to get on the trains, smoke arising from various restaurants and cafes and walkaway stores where you get a load of Blue Point oysters. Going to the cliff was definitely, it was becoming a blue collar experience. Sutro, more investments. Sutro even purchased an electric railroad company, rather created it from scratch, named it after himself, of course. And this was running in competition with the steam trains. He was so miffed at Southern Pacific, Sutro just went and built his own electric streetcar line. And where was it headed to? In the background, the Cliff House. And to the right, the baths. It took you literally to the front door. A few years later, inside the railroad depot, the streetcar depot, and by the time this picture was taken, you can see that the dash sign, it says number 2 Clement. That was the streetcar line. Today, it's a Muni bus line. He called this the Midway Plaisance, and it was, indeed, it was a Ferris wheel. Technically, it was called the Firth wheel. The name Ferris was patented, but it included several arcades. It included a roller coaster. It included a mirror maze, other attractions, all opened at the same time. Everything's going full bore. Flags are flying. And death claims Adolph Sutro, philanthropist. He had a stroke in 1896 or 1897, and he spent the last year of his life in semi-reclusion at Sutro Heights in the house. He was apparently slipping mentally. It might have been Alzheimer's. He was diabetic. He was not healthy. His oldest daughter was a physician, Dr. Emma Merritt, and she oversaw his health, and he was failing at such a heavy rate. She moved him out of the house and to her place downtown, so it'd be closer to hospital services. And Adolph died on August the 8th, 1898. And Emma took over control as the executrix, and she opened the books, and it was a rude awakening from research done by other historians. It appears that the Sutro estate was vast, with huge real estate holdings in San Francisco and Nevada and Sonoma County. But when it came to liquid couple of $1,000. That's all that was liquid assets. Everything else was tied up in real estate. And of course, there were immense expenses and loans that had been taken out to build the baths, to build the Cliff House. Sutro was a businessman. You borrow, you build, you improve, you flip, you make money. Well, Emma had to make sense out of all this. And what she started to realize was that we can't maintain like this. One of the first things she did was she sold off the Sutro Electric Railroad, and they shut down the midway above Sutro Baths. And then she looked to start selling other portions of the sprawling Sutro estate. She'd remain the executor for many years. One thing that she really tried to do was they really wanted to sell the Sutro Baths. This is actually a promo, a real estate promo for selling the baths back in the 1910s. To cut to the chase, they kept trying to sell it. No one wanted to buy it. Sutro, before he died, even said his idea was not to be running a bathing establishment forever. He hoped to be able to sell it as soon as it was open and running. No dice. In 1913, the family, they tried to get the city to buy it. There was a bond measure for $687,000. That would include the baths, the Sutro Heights, and a bunch of land on Land's End. No dice. The city turned it down. Then Emma tried to sell it in 1919 to anybody for bargain basement at $410,000. No takers. The Sutro estate would end up actually running the Sutro Baths until 1952. And this promo publication, we have some images here in the 1910s. Activities going on in the Sutro Baths. They had West Coast swimming finals, women's and men's, draw huge crowds. When the place was doing good, it drew lots of crowds. On weekdays, you could fire a cannon through the place. From the books that I've seen, the returns, it had a huge staff, sometimes over 60 people on the staff, ranging from taxidermists to locker room attendants to boiler engineers. And on other times, they would cut it back. Profits might be $1,200, $1,500 a month. On a building that cost you $1 million to build, it's going to take a long time to amortize that. Kind of the dark days were the 1910s and 20s. This is a 1912, the old Firth wheel, nothing else around it, just sitting there. Apparently the brake broke and the thing would just pinwheel in a heavy wind, making a screeching noise. They finally demolished it just to get it out of the way. This was a merry way. After the midway was torn down, nature starting to reclaim the land. 1930 aerial. This is about the lowest of Sutro Baths. The Depression is on. Prohibition is on. The Cliff House, lower center, it was shut down. The family could not get rid of the Sutro Baths. They tried everything except giving it away. And the most recent manager of the estate decided that in for a dime, in for a dollar. Let's give the place a facelift. And Adolph G. Sutro, who was Adolph's grandson, he was managing the baths. Oh, sorry, I threw in a couple of photos showing a sad state of things. Sutro Heights, this 1896, 1908. The fate of the conservatory, little boys with rocks. In 1933, Adolph G. Sutro, he reinvented Sutro Baths. Instead of an aging barn full of Victoriana, what he tried to do was he tried to make it a jazz age destination. And one of the things that he did was he hyped it as a, one-stop recreation site where there would be jazz bands on weekend nights. There would be several layers of dining establishments. There was outdoor volleyball courts. There was outdoor picnic grounds constructed. They put in a sunbathing platform, and they remodeled the place to reflect the new Sutros. This is how the original Sutro Baths entrance looks. And then in its Art Deco, exterior. But if you look carefully, you can see right behind the tall yellowish towers, there's the old building. It was facadism. But they really put the money out. This is PR photographs. What they're saying quite blatantly in this is not your father's Sutros anymore. No longer were you required to wear those wool suits. In the background, you can see there's advertising the Sutro Silver Slide, which is essentially a water slide into the baths. And on the left, Kitty's Indoor Play Beach with wading pools. Again, something for everybody. Inside the revamped Sutro Baths, this picture was taken. Hard to pick out, but in the upper right-hand corner, use the red pen color tool here. You can see there's a high diving tower, and below it, there's a big diving tank. Turns out a problem was the original depth of the deepest pool was only 11 feet, and people kept diving into it and cracking their head open from the towers. So they, Adolf G. Sutro had a diving tank constructed inside the baths that was 17 feet deep. So that was good, safe distancing being provided there. The main pool, this is the one that was generally at ocean temperature. But you can see the slides that were built, swimming rafts full of kids. And they even created an indoor tropic beach. They drained the corner of one of the pools, and they constructed these little wiki huts that were like little a thatched roof rum huts. They draped, we think those are excess parachutes to look like clouds in the ceiling, and it just didn't work. It had all the ambiance of going to a party in a drained swimming pool. So the Sutro Tropic Baths, the Tropic Beach, and was gone by 1937 and replaced by a much more popular attraction. If nothing else, Adolf G saw what worked and what didn't. This wasn't working, this did. He decided to rebuild part of the baths and turn it into an indoor ice skating rink. And it opened in 1936, and it was immensely popular, immediately popular. They had couples skating, they had ice follies types of shows, they had indoor ice hockey, and oddly enough, it was all, again, facadism, all this funny painted backdrop. Just on the other side of those chalet type of structures on the left, that was just a thin plywood wall. There were people splashing around in the heated saltwater pools on the other side of that wall. And then sometimes when the weather conditions were just right, indoor fog would form. If nothing else, people were still coming to the cliff, even in the depths of the Depression. Even a shipwreck could become an attraction. In this case, lower right, 1937, the ship Frank Buck went on the rocks not too far from Sutro Baths. And you can see on the upper left, there's one number 2 streetcar line with a dash card that says, "See the tanker on the rocks." World War II, immediate post-war, color film lets us see what the colors looked like inside the baths. In addition, it tells us a little bit about what was happening sociologically. In this group photo here, you can't find a single person wearing one of those Sutro swimsuits. They're all wearing contemporary clothing. Now, the men and women used to be segregated into women's and children's pool versus, men. In this case here, it's very eclectic. What you don't see yet, we figure these pictures are taken about 1950, are people of color. Sutros apparently had a long-standing, unwritten discrimination policy. A couple of years later, you start, it apparently just quietly went away. And 1951, 52, 53, you start seeing Asians and African Americans in the pools and the ice skating rink. This fellow with the classic 1930s mustache, this is George Whitney. George Whitney and his brother, Leo, they owned Playland at the Beach. And in 1937, they had purchased the Cliff House. They were the competitors for the Sutro family and Sutro Baths. They were all friendly competitors. There's plenty of people heading out to these destinations. And in 1952, the Sutro estate announced, in September 52, they were closing. They just could not keep running the Sutro Baths anymore. It was too expensive. The crowds weren't there. And reluctantly, they were going to close it and tear it down. George Whitney stepped forward literally at the last moment, maybe waiting for the best deal he could possibly get, and he purchased the Sutro Baths from the Sutro estate. And George Whitney revamped the baths one more time, changing it from its Art Deco appearance with the tropic baths, Sutro Baths, to what we call mid-century modern. What George Whitney did was he recognized that there was still a few nickels to be made out of the old place, and that he would be the perfect place for him to display all of his personal collections. He was, boy, was he a collector. He went around the world. He collected everything from spinning wheels to historic buggies to a collection of personal effects of General Tom Thumb. And he wanted a place to display his memorabilia. The baths were perfect. The problem was it was old, it was aging, and it was going to cost him a lot of money. So again, facadism, this is really the 1930s Art Deco facade. Look at the two vertical towers with the windows. Yep, just covered them in redwood. And for about a year, they did keep the swimming pools open, but it was apparently just such a monetary drag, and attendance was minimal at the pools as compared to the ice rink. So in the last day of December 1953, they shut the swimming pools down. There was no swimming 1954 or after. That's why the facade, it no longer says Sutro's Baths, it says just Fabulous Sutros. And the ice rink was the primary attraction. This is the Sutros that I remember. You'd go in there, you'd pay either just to go in and look around the baths and all the exhibits, or you paid extra to rent ice skates. And if you were like most kids in those days, you kind of wobbled around in a never-ending circle for the afternoon. There were pros. The professional skaters tended to stay in the center section. They knew what they were doing. The rest of us, we were just sort of moving traffic hazards. The ice rink was actually quite dark inside. It turned out that all that great glass, it tended to melt the ice. So they, in this picture here, you can see how dark it is over the rink. They intentionally blanked out the glass roof over the ice skating rink. Maintaining the ice, you use this on the right. It's called a Zamboni. I think anyone's ever been to a hockey game, remember when the Zamboni comes out and it resurfaces the ice? This was Zamboni number 7. This was a rather cutting edge for the Sutros to have this. And I get a kick out of it because if you look underneath where it says Fabulous Sutros, the lower part, it's an army jeep that has been greatly modified to skim and surface the ice. The rest of Sutros, it was filled with Whitney's collections. Rickshaws being pulled by mannequins. Antique carriages. The walls were covered with historic photographs of San Francisco. Whitney's got their start running a fast photo service, and the Whitneys collected historic photos of San Francisco. And also brought in sort of odd attractions. This was the Lord's Last Supper, and this was installed right at the end of the main museum level inside Sutros. And like many things, it was free to get into and a heavily suggested donation to leave. So you walked into the Lord's Last Supper, nothing happened. It's just a narrated voice and organ music talking about what happened at the Lord's Last Supper. And then when you left, there was a big donation box and a suggested donation to, frequently it was to a charity. This was the Boys Clubs of America. Inside Sutros also, the Musée Mécanique, big collection of Whitney purchased orchestrions and animated villages, pinball machines. The Musée Mécanique still exists today. Much of what was in Sutro still exists. It's moved. It's all over the world now. The Sky Tram was one of the last attractions. 1955, the Sky Tram went into service. It was an aerial car suspended by overhead cables, and it traveled from behind the cliff house to a station that was constructed on the tip of Point Lobos, right outside the baths. It was slow moving. It was expensive to ride. There was really nothing to see when you got to the other end except to go back again. And it lasted somehow from 1955 to 1965, never really turning a profit, but getting rustier and rustier the whole time. There was a door just off the ice rink in Sutro's that myself and every other kid in San Francisco discovered. It was an emergency exit door, and if you pushed it open, this is what you saw. This was the closed off back portion of the baths, the part that the Whitneys elected not to keep running. This is the tanks, the swimming pools, the bleacher seats, the plunge in, which was a hot dog stand. Still signs for no running. This was, everybody wanted to go back and see what was in there. What did it look like? Color photograph. This is one of the few I've seen that actually reveals some of the colors of the glass and the overhead domes. And I guess they got one heck of a deal on jaundice yellow paint or something, because the paint scheme was very unremarkable. Late 1965, 66, the rumors started to go that the Whitneys were going to close down Sutro Baths too. No one really thought that was going to happen. I mean, Sutro's had been on its last legs for years. And then finally, on February 28th, 1966, they closed. This ran in the San Francisco Examiner the next day, March 1st. Time runs out for Sutro Baths. The Whitney heirs, George Whitney died. His family inherited the baths and the cliff house and playland, and they were trying to figure out what to do with all the properties. They decided that Sutro's itself, it was not going to make any money, no reason to keep it around. In fact, they had better ideas for it. Turn it into condominiums. And within a couple of days, keep out signs went up. Stuff started to be packed up and moved out. And by the end of May, the baths had pretty much been emptied. This was what was going to happen. This was one of several preliminary plans for what to do with the cliff house. Give you a location down here at the lower left. This is Fisherman's Rock, which is such a landmark there at the Sutro Bath site. This is a rebuilt cliff house at lower right, and this is where the baths sat, dead center. All condominiums. Here's another version that came out. This one's even maybe more terrifying. If this building here looks familiar at upper left, that's a building that is very similar in design to the Fontana Apartments that overlook Ghirardelli Square and Aquatic Park. It was the same developer, Robert Fraser, who was planning on this for the Sutro Bath site. If you get kind of disoriented, on the right, that's Point Lobos Avenue coming down, and with my pen, the building I'm circling here, lower right, that's where Louis' restaurant is today. The whole of the cove would have been stair-stepped condominiums, and at the lower left over here, I love this, a bunch of cabanas on the beach. Everyone knows that the beach at Sutro Baths is just perfect for hanging out on a sunny day under an umbrella. None of this ever happened. What happened was the people that owned the bath site, they kept trying to get funding to redevelop it. They kept trying to get investors to come in. Nobody was interested in participating in something like this, and the local neighborhood was having fits every time one of these proposals started to show up. What happened to the baths themselves? Demolition began in early June of 1966. And on June 26th, 1966, a very convenient fire broke out that in one long afternoon destroyed the building. They had just begun demolition, and part of what they had done was they'd torn out some of the sidewalls so that demolition equipment could get inside. And without interior walls and being old and wood, the place just, it went up. It was just dry, and there was a westerly wind. And it was an arson job, not an arson job for money. As best I can tell from the research that everyone's done, nobody made money off of this arson job. The building was being demolished. The company that was doing the demolition, they hired a fellow who was a pyromaniac. When he was a kid, he had burned down his junior high school building. And his records were sealed, apparently, because he was a minor. So he was hired as a night watchman. And on his watch, the fire broke out. The San Francisco Fire Department, police department were convinced that the watchman started the fire, but they could never prove their case. It was a moot point. The baths were gone. After 14 years, the baths were finally purchased for open space. After several different groups owned title to the land, all of them had different ideas for how to develop it. And the last group that owned it, they had plans that they could never realize, but they used them as sort of a bargaining chip. And who they sold it to was the National Park Service. The National Park Service was authorized by Congress to purchase by fee simple, like the baths, or take by transfer from the city of San Francisco, all the shoreline, to protect it as open space. And eventually, the Cliff House properties and the Sutro Baths site were sold in two different lumps. The first was 1977, 3.79 million to George Whitney Jr. to buy the Cliff House and the land around it. And then in 1980, $5.5 million from the developers. There was a threat of condemnation. The developer settled, and it's been open space ever since. But what do you do with a site like this? We had multiple public hearings when I was a park ranger. Folks, what do you want to see done with Sutro Baths? What do you think would be fun to do with it? And what we heard were three things. One was tear it all out and restore the beach to its natural condition. Okay, that's one thought. Another one was rebuild it the way it looked in the 1890s. That was a very expensive proposition. And the third, which had the overwhelming support public, was pretty much leave it as it is. I called it the don't ruin the ruins factor. And that's how it stayed, essentially as stabilized ruins from 1980 up through present. We've come up with the National Park Service, my old employer, we came up with different ideas for how to interpret the site, put walkways in, maybe put safety railings up. People really don't want that. They love the edginess. They love to go there. They love to explore. Frankly, I'm astounded that more people aren't injured at the site than actually are. I will admit that deaths occur down there, but it's usually not the ruins. It's people going out on the rock faces, usually young, usually male, usually beer is involved, and false bravado. But thousands of people on a nice day will be down there crawling around the ruins, asking the same question I did when I was a kid. What was this place? What was it about? And it's full of intriguing features. This mysterious tunnel looks like something Fred Flintstone would live in, that goes clear through the point at Land's End. I'll give it a well. Turns out what it was a quarry tunnel. It was used for quarrying rock to reinforce the seawall outside Sutro Baths. And it was also used, they had little ore carts that ran through it that carried rock one way and they carried garbage the other. They'd roll garbage out this tunnel, just dump it into the Pacific Ocean. This one always fascinated me, a flight of stairs carved out of natural rock. Turns out that this was a staircase that led into the big pool, the main pool at Sutro's, all silted in. And every once in a while you get special visitors. This is a guy called He got nicknamed Sutro Sam. He's a river otter, and he showed up in September of 2012, and he hung out for about 5 months. He apparently was found a snug spot inside the ruins, probably inside one of the old pump rooms, and he'd come out and he'd catch fish, and I guess he tried to go after seabirds. After 5 months, he just disappeared. Sutro Sam, as he was nicknamed. Why did he show up? Don't know. He maybe made his way up from the peninsula, from the open space areas. Why did he disappear? Probably because he was a young male and it was time to go start a otter family. We're still learning about the Sutro Baths. In 2008, we did a physical survey and evaluation of the tunnel system at the baths and the catch system. Remember in the very early part, that area where the waves broke, the catch basin, we had no good drawings of it. We had no good photographs of it. So it was decided that at dead low time, the park's archaeology team would go out, we document it. We waited to the lowest tide of the year. We went through any number of safety hearings and approvals and had a rescue team standing by. We went out through the old tidal tunnel that carried water once upon a time to the baths, out into the water catchment system. We found features we had no idea what they were because they didn't show up in any maps. This is architect John Hall, one of our volunteers. This is a vertical pipe just popping straight up out of a rock facing. Well, it got charted. Someday we'll figure out exactly what it was for. But John, just before I took this picture, he had an inkling that around that rock face to the left, there was something else, something just out of sight. And I watched in horror. I was supposed to be in charge. I watched in horror as he climbed around that point of land with a camera in his left hand. And as he's dangling off the rock face, he leans around with the camera in his left hand and he just snaps blindly. And what he got, this is the best view. It's the corner of a blocked up doorway in the face of a rock cliff 15 feet above the water. Where does it go? Who carved it? What's behind that sealed door? You know, what was this place? And the answers are still sometimes elusive. We're still researching. To bring it home, Sutro's at its height in the early 1930s when it was being rejuvenated by the Sutro heirs for one last time. You can see the expanse that it covered here at Land's End next to the Cliff House. On the site today, somebody said it looks like an empty socket where a tooth has been pulled. But oh, what an amazing place it is for exploring, for wondering, for San Franciscans, for people from out of town to go out. And as someone said, we don't have a lot of ruins in San Francisco, but by God, these are our ruins. Here at the edge of America, here at the edge of San Francisco, here were the Ohlone people, the people who lived here for thousands of years before the Europeans, where they camped, where they danced, and where they sang a song at night. And the refrain said, I'm dancing on the brink of the world. Welcome to the cliff. Oh, one more thing. I want to thank these folks who helped me in my research, who shared generously of their memories and of their photographs and of their maps and collections. And I want to thank you for coming, and I hope someday to meet you in person. Thank you very much.